Hello and welcome to the Breaking Muscle podcast. I'm your host, Tom McCormick, and today I'm going to be talking about one of the most polarizing topics in the fitness industry. Now, you may be wondering what that topic is, and I will give you a quick clue. It's body recomposition. Now, we all want to gain muscle and lose fat. In fact, for most people, gaining muscle and losing fat is the holy grail and the reason they go to the gym. And doing both simultaneously is known as body recomposition. And it seemed for a while it was the most talked about topic in the bodybuilding and actually wider fitness community. Especially if the questions I get in my Instagram DMs are any sort of valid gauge. And in fact, some recent research studies have shown recomposition effects in their participants. And that kind of finding, understandably, attracts quite a lot of attention from gym geeks and in the wider fitness community as those messages get put out there. And as I said, recomposition is a polarizing topic. Some people say it's impossible. Others will tell you it's the best way to reach your goals and that traditional bulking and cutting is dumb. Well, if I'm honest, both are wrong. Recomposition isn't impossible, but it is extremely hard to achieve. And this is why the vast majority of people who try to do it will fail. In fact, most people chasing these two goals, one of muscle gain and the second being fat loss, often end up failing to achieve either, which is really, really frustrating. And they don't lose a significant amount of fat or gain a noticeable amount of muscle mass. And that's why I so often warn people off trying to recomp, because I've seen people try it and they fail. And a lot of the people end up doing what I call gaintaining. So they basically maintain their physique, their body weight stays the same, they're about the same level of body fat, same level of muscularity, but they're training really hard in the gym. So they're getting all the downsides of the fatigue and having lots of hours spent in the gym, but they're not getting any upsides in terms of a change in their physique that they're looking for. And that is really, really frustrating and a complete waste of time and effort when you should be seeing results from your training and you should be able to see that your physique changes, your performance in the gym improves. Now, that's not to say that body recomposition is flawed and not possible. It's more that those people don't know how to go about training for recomposition optimally and dieting to support that training to get those effects. And later on in this episode, I will explain exactly how you can set yourself up for the best chance of having success with a recomposition. But with that kind of little word of warning and how some people get it wrong and they just end up gaintaining and not seeing results, spinning their wheels, but accumulating lots of fatigue and wasting a lot of effort. As with every rule, there are some exceptions, and body recomposition is no different. So in some circumstances, recomping is easier than others, and the results are more dramatic. Those are, number one, as a complete beginner. Number two, after a long layoff from training. Number three, when you finally start to train properly. Number four, if you have been training properly but your diet had been poor and you dramatically improve it. And number five, if you take performance enhancing drugs. Well, in all of those above conditions, a significant recomposition effect is possible. And I wouldn't really try to talk you out of any of them, well, except for number five. I'm not going to tell you to take drugs. I'm definitely going to try and talk you out of taking drugs because, health grounds, that is definitely not a wise move. But it's not because the training would be poor, but it's just that there's getting in good shape's one thing, but damaging your health is definitely not worth that risk. But as a complete beginner, recomposition is probably the way to go. With a lot of clients I've trained, dramatic increases in muscle mass and fat loss when they first start training. Those newbie gains are a real thing, and if you can be doing the right thing off the bat, then you'll see incredible results. Sadly, most people don't go to a coach or a personal trainer or have a friend who really knows what they're doing with training, and most of us kind of waste that window of opportunity for newbie gains by training like a jackass and eating like a child at a birthday party. After a long layoff is another time when you can see recomposition. Now, part of that is regaining the lost muscle. So if you've got in shape and then have had to be off the gym for a long time, either because you had an injury or because you fell out of love with training or work, life got in the way, then when you return, you should see that you can regain the muscle that you previously built much, much quicker than it took to initially build it. And you should also be able to see fat loss at the same time. Now, when you finally start to train properly is another opportunity. It's a bit like I said, a lot of people waste their newbie gains by training poorly and not getting the most out of them. The good news is you still have a big window of opportunity to make rapid improvements and progress in your physique if you get a really good training plan. If you start training properly for a period of time, you can see a really impressive recomposition effect where actually the stimulus from your training is properly dosed, properly applied, and you gain muscle and lose fat. Next one was if you've been training properly but your diet had been poor and you dramatically improve it. Well, look, as I've said before, training creates the stimulus for adaptation to take place and creates the potential for muscle gain and fat loss, but your diet will dictate if you reach that potential. So even if you have been training properly, if your diet's been pretty suboptimal and you really focus in on that, then you can see a recomposition effect. Now, I would caution against saying, getting you too excited about that. It's not going to be dramatic and probably not as powerful as the newbie gains one, but there is scope for optimizing things and getting some untapped progress if your training has been good but your diet has previously been poor. Now, with those conditions out of the way, historically, in almost every other situation, I would warn you against trying to recomp, especially if your goal is to add notable muscle mass. I think you would be much better served by taking dedicated phases focused on gaining muscle and then losing fat rather than chasing two rabbits at the same time. If you try and chase those two rabbits, you usually catch none, and the same thing goes because to some extent fat loss and muscle gain are opposing goals. Now, there's a bit more cool science stuff we can look into in that and that I'm going to cover in a second. And that's why that little sort of teaser there is why I don't think you necessarily have to completely give up on recomping. You just need to know that it suits certain situations more than others, and to be successful you will need to meet certain criteria, have a great attention to detail, and a heroic work ethic to get the results you want. Now, this shouldn't really come as that big of a surprise though. After all, isn't everything worth achieving in life extremely challenging? And recomping, so building muscle and losing fat at the same time, it's possible. But it is definitely difficult. So let's just recap. If you're wondering before this episode, is recomposition possible? Absolutely, it is. The short answer, yes. But it's ordinarily very hard to do. And the vast majority of people that try to do it will fail. And in fact, they'll end up achieving neither of the two goals that come together of achieving a recomposition of muscle gain and fat loss. You can be different though, especially if you apply the information I'm about to give you in this podcast. So I'd like to frame it as it's a case of difficult but not impossible. And that kind of reminds me of a quote I first saw in the office of my school careers advisor back when I was, I don't know, maybe about 15, something like that. And on the wall there was a little picture, I can't remember what was on the picture, but there was a quote over the top of it and it said, "The difficult we do immediately, the impossible takes a little longer." Now, whether they were trying to be motivational or making a bit of a backhanded comment about the impossibility of helping me to achieve a successful career, I'm not really certain. But regardless, recomposition has often been described as impossible, and that is false. And it's unfortunate, I think. It's definitely difficult though, but it is not impossible. Now, I know that because I've seen it. I've had the effects myself personally, and I've had many clients achieve it. So let me just maybe go into why it is that people think recomposition is impossible. And I think the best way to look at this is actually from one of our former guests on the podcast, Chris Barakat, who is a bodybuilder, researcher, and author of a recent scientific review on recomposition. So the most up-to-date scientific analysis of the literature on recomposition. Chris has done it fairly recently, and I'll be covering some of the details of that in a moment, but he identified the key misconception that causes so many kind of internet experts and gurus to discount the possibility of recomposition. And he says that most people go wrong by misinterpreting the laws of thermodynamics, and you're probably familiar with these to some extent. And the laws of thermodynamics prove that to build muscle, you must store energy, and in this case we're thinking about increased muscle proteins. And to lose fat, you must burn energy. So you reduce stored body fat by, breaking down adipocytes. Now, the problem with that is then people extend that and make the mistake to then assume that it means that you must be in an energy surplus to build muscle, and you must be in an energy deficit to lose fat. Now, here's that cool science bit I was going to talk to you, and it's a critical point, and I'm going to quote Chris directly here. Chris says, These assumptions aren't that clear cut because our skeletal muscle and fat tissues are two different functioning compartments of your body, which signal different metabolic processes that require different amounts of energy, totally independent of one another. So, in layman's terms, building muscle and losing fat are not dependent on one another. They kind of can occur simultaneously. They are linked and they are governed to some extent by some related physiology though. So although they can happen simultaneously and independent of one another, they won't happen necessarily to extreme levels. And what I mean by that is in a recomposition, you can build some muscle and lose some fat, but you probably won't build as much muscle as possible in that time frame or lose as much fat as fast as possible in that time frame. It's a case of getting some of both as opposed to the best of both. And I think that's an important way to view this. Some people hear about recomposition being possible and think that they're going to pack on size as quickly as possible and also drop fat as rapidly as possible, and that's just not going to occur. Now, that's fine. Recomposition might be just what you need. It might be the case of you want to lose a reasonable amount of fat but build a little bit of muscle, and you're prepared to do all the little things to make that happen. But it is tricky, and that's why I do warn people against it. Chasing and having unrealistic expectations. And at this point, I feel like I need another public service announcement, but I'm guilty and should take my share of the blame for putting people off recomposition. I feel like I've probably played my part in popularising the belief that recomposition isn't possible. And that's not because I have said it's impossible. I've, on record of having, reported clients that have achieved it and talking about it before, but I have, as I've done at the start of this podcast, identified the challenges involved and highlighted the specific circumstances that best suit it and are required for really dramatic changes of recomposition to occur. And I've voiced the need for a calorie surplus for skinny guys to pack on size. And all of that is true. And when I largely deal online with my clients, naturally skinny guys that struggle to gain weight, I'm going to encourage them to eat a surplus, and to really transform their physique they need to pack on a lot of muscle, and they will, realistically they need to be in surplus to do that. And when people see, I need a surplus to build muscle, they kind of they jump a few steps down the road and assume that means it's not possible to recomp. And suddenly that black and white world that we live in means that people look for absolutes. So we sort of live in a world of binary snowflakes who think that if something is difficult, it gets labelled as impossible, and there are no shades of grey with their understanding, and that difficult can be done. And given that I've partly discounted the possibility of significant progress via recomposition for many people, I feel it's only fair I take my share of the blame a little bit there. And I do regret the fact that by pointing out the difficulties with achieving recomposition, I may have made some people think it's impossible. If they've interpreted it that way, they probably lost some motivation or even belief in the way they can change their physique. And obviously I never want to have that effect, and especially if it leads them to giving up on their goals. I'd be really disappointed if that happened. But I suppose good coaches reflect and adapt, and one of the things about coaching is communication. So I like to think of myself as a good coach, and I, upon reflection, think maybe I've been wrong with the messaging I've put out there in the past, and I need to look more at the viewpoint of the listener. And so whilst I've said in the past that those 5 conditions, let's just recap those quickly, as a complete beginner, after a long layoff, when you start training properly, and if you finally get your diet on point, even if you have been training properly, and finally if you're on boatloads of drugs, those were the ones I would tell you that was where it was only possible really to pursue recomposition effectively in those circumstances. I now think actually probably it's possible outside of these conditions, and rather than those 5 circumstances, I think most people can get a recomposition effect. The magnitude of this effect is determined by where they fall on a sliding scale of factors, which I'm about to expand upon. But see, I've kind of moved on, and I'm trying to make sure that I'm not giving you that black and white thinking and highlighting the shades of grey, so you can make a really good decision. And with that information, you can decide if this is for you. And I might well still tell you that recomposition is not the right choice for you. Here's how to assess your potential to recomp. As I said, it's on a kind of sliding scale. And actually, I think a good thing to visualize is a Venn diagram of the 3 factors. So let me dive into those. But after speaking with Chris Barakat, the author of that research paper and former guest on the show, I think the chances of a significant recomposition occur can largely be triangulated between 3 key factors. And those are training age, training status, and body fat percentage. And you can visualize those three factors as three overlapping circles, like in a Venn diagram. Now, training age simply describes how long you've been training. So someone who is brand new to training has a larger scope for recomposition than someone who has been training for a decade or more. Training status quantifies how advanced you are. It describes the quality and effectiveness of the training that you've done in your lifting career to date. We all know people who have been going to the gym for years with little to show for it though, right? And they've been working out, but they haven't really been training, or certainly not training with any real purpose or effectiveness. A good metric of training status is how strong you are. If you are a bodybuilder posting elite lifting powerlifting numbers, then you can probably consider yourself, pretty advanced, but also your chances of recomposition are relatively slim. Now, as a rule of thumb, the stronger you are, probably the less likely there is to be a scope for recomposition, because you've closed up on your genetic potential. But genetic potential is something to consider. Obviously, your strength levels, to some extent, will be dictated by that. So you might be very strong, but have only been training 6 months. Well, it might be that you are a genetic freak and you're going to get great results whatever you do. Likewise, you may have been training for a decade, been training smart for a decade, be like strong, but no more than an intermediate. Well, in terms of metrics you see online for comparing your lifts to elite status, but for you that may be advanced. Your genetic ceiling for your strength levels may not be that high, and so you might be quite close to that ceiling already. So again, you've got to take all of these things in and take them in context. The final of the three factors to consider is your body fat percentage. This is pretty simple, but the leaner you are, the less likely you are to have a recomposition to any noticeable degree. If you're already pretty lean, then there's only so much lean you can get. So based on those three factors of training age, status and body fat, you can pinpoint how likely recomping is for you. If you've got a low training age, low training status and a high body fat, there is a big overlap on that Venn diagram I described earlier. Those three circles sit over the top of each other. There's quite a big overlap, and that means the window of opportunity to gain muscle and lose fat is large for you. Now, that gives you a big target to aim at, and then you probably should pursue recomping. On the other hand, if you have a high training age, high training status, and are already very lean, then the circles in the Venn diagram are going to be further apart, and the overlap in the middle is going to be tiny. The target in the middle is really, really small to shoot for, and you'd have to get everything so on point to even have a chance of recomping. It would be difficult, but then even if you did, the magnitude of that effect will be quite small. So if that describes you, then I strongly suggest you follow a cyclical approach of dedicated bulk and cut phases to continue building muscle and losing fat long term, rather than chasing a recomp, because I think you will fall into that gaintaining situation where you don't really see the results you want to, but you have to work really hard just to stay the same. So those three factors are a very good indicator of your recomp potential. But there are other factors that tend to play a role and kind of feed into those three. But I like efficiency. So rather than measuring a bunch of underlying metrics that contribute, I prefer to focus on the big rocks that really determine your potential and manage the things that, or measure the things that really matter. But for completeness, I will cover some of the other factors outside of those top three in here, because again, I want you to have all the knowledge you can to make the right decisions for you. And you're probably thinking something like, oh, well, surely lifestyle factors like sleep, or my diet, or my recovery methods, my supplementation, how I manage stress levels must play a role in the chance of me achieving a recomposition effect. And you would be 100% correct. They certainly play a big role. But as I said, if you eat like a kid at a birthday party, get less sleep than an insomniac, and have stress levels higher than a criminal under interrogation, then you're unlikely to have low levels of body fat and be crushing it in the gym. Your training status of body fat percentage are going to reflect those factors quite quickly. It's going to be fairly obvious by looking at what's my body fat and how's my training performance. Is going to give you a trickle-down effect of all those underlying things aren't in place. So those two things immediately tell you you're not in a good place for recomping. Now, and if you think on the other hand, how many people do you know that eat a diet full of lean proteins? They have loads of fruits and vegetables. They get great fat sources in there. There's lots of fish oil, avocado. They eat oily fish. There's nuts and seeds. Really good varied diet. They sleep 8+ hours a night. How many people like that do you know that are obese and struggling for the energy to go and train and work out? No, I didn't think there would be many. So again, your body fat percentage and your quality of your training and performance in the gym kind of are like leading indicators. And as I said, I like that efficiency. So rather than measuring all these superfluous metrics that feed into it, take an honest look in the mirror to assess your training age, training status and body fat. What looks back at you will quickly tell you if a recomp is on the cards for you. If you look fat and out of shape in the mirror, then chances are, good news, a recomp could happen. And if you tighten up on a few details, you can gain muscle and lose fat. If you look in the mirror and you're in great shape, you look like a bodybuilder or a cover model or something like that, well, again, chances of a recomp not that high. Now, as a little side note to this, almost none of us are actually as advanced as we'd like to think. And so I'd be prepared to say that if you're a guy with over 15% body fat, you probably have some scope to recomp because you're probably not as advanced in the gym or as strong as you kind of pat yourself on the back and like to think. Generally, we tend to overestimate a little bit how advanced we are. Right, let's shift things on a little bit now, and I'll give you some details on how to give you the best chance of success with a recomp in a moment. But just again, a word of warning: just because you can doesn't mean you should. So you may have looked in the mirror and thought, you know what, I can recomp, I can do this. This is the way to go. Well, as a Breaking Muscle podcast listener, let's be honest, the chances are you're probably stronger, more muscular, leaner, and more dedicated than the typical gym goer. You probably take this pretty seriously and invest a lot of time and effort into your gym, your performance, your workouts, and your physique. And this is why I do tend to caution people like you against recomping. It might not be the most efficient way for you to go about things. You might well be better served by following dedicated muscle building, cutting, and strength phases to reach your goals. That cyclical approach, which I've covered in previous podcasts, might well be the best way for you. And it will allow you to get a recomposition effect of being more muscular and leaner, but over time, where you commit to one of the goals and then pivot and switch to the other, as opposed to trying to chase both goals at once. Now, to give you a comprehensive overview and to help you decide if recomping is the right choice for you, let me expand on the anecdotal experience I've seen of coaching multiple clients through recomposition, and then I'll combine it with an assessment and a review of the science on the matter right now, because as I said, there's more and more science coming out about this. So, firstly, it's important to state that the scientific literature provides compelling evidence of the possibility to achieve recomposition effects. And anecdotally, I've seen it with numerous clients myself. Many of the recomposition effects I had with clients were when they were new to me. And because they were new to me, I treated them as beginners. And that's despite many of them having multiple years of what they would call good training under their belt. Now, because of the way I treated them, I believe that recomposition was possible. I felt the improved training and diet quality I was going to help them achieve was going to mean that they could see those newbie gains that they kind of missed out on. And in fact, I almost demanded it of them. With certain people, I've been, really pushed them hard, really had high expectations. And because of those high expectations, I did push them extremely hard, both in the gym and to adhere to the plan outside the gym. And funny enough, guess what? They built muscle, they lost fat. So belief in your chances of recomping is critical. You've got to trust the process and believe it can happen. Setting high expectations and demanding the best of yourself and or your clients if you train people is also vital. And with belief and hard work, you can achieve dramatic results in recomposition, as with anything in life. But that still doesn't mean that necessarily pursuing it for you is the best approach. Like I say, a cyclical approach might still get you to your goal quicker and more efficiently than trying to recomp. You're not going to recomp yourself to being 30 pounds heavier and shredded. That does require you to do distinct building and cutting phases. It also requires time, patience, and perseverance. Now, as I will cover in more detail, whilst that was like a long-term strategy to get significantly bigger, to gain 30 pounds of scale weight and get lean, recomping is really best used as a short-term strategy. So we will go into detail on that in a moment. But that's a quick overview of my observations. Now let's look into what the science says about recomping. And as I said, there is plenty of evidence in the scientific literature for recomping occurring quite frequently. In fact, Chris says that in the research he's conducted, it's almost the norm, and it's definitely not the outlier in his research. And one of the things I'll quickly say about that is that they train people really, really hard in his studies and the stuff he does with people in the lab. they push their sets to a high relative intensity. So if you think about RIR, reps in reserve, very often these training studies are done with no reps in reserve, and people are pushing training intensity or relative intensity really hard. So one quick thing to think about for you is, are you actually training hard enough to get the results you want? It may be as simple a case of, let's ramp up my effort and intensity for a bit and see what happens. You might be pleasantly surprised. Right, now let's move on to what the actual research shows about the potential for recomping. Now, the first one I'll talk to you about is a study at the Norwegian School of Sports Sciences, where they had 24 elite male and female athletes lift 4 days a week and lose weight either slowly or quickly. Those who lost weight slowly maintained a moderate 500 calorie deficit, and the participants who aimed to lose weight quickly maintained an 800 calorie deficit. On average, the slow weight loss group lost about 0.7% of their body weight per week, and the fast weight loss group lost about 1% of their body weight per week. Now, here's the interesting part. At the conclusion of the study, they found that the slow weight loss group decreased their body fat by 8% and increased their overall muscle mass by 2%. That's a pretty sweet swing in body composition there. Whereas the fast weight loss group didn't fare so well. They reduced their body fat by 4%, pretty good, but they lost muscle mass too. So, first things first, it's possible to achieve recomposition. Second thing, the rate of weight loss is a big factor, and I'll give you my thoughts on the ideal rate for you and how you can personalize that later on. Now, there are numerous other studies showing a recomposition effects. So a study by Alcaraz et al. Found that participants following a specific training protocol gained 1.5 kilos of lean mass, so that's like 3.3 pounds of lean mass, and lost 1.5% body fat in 8 weeks. In another study, participants managed to gain 1.4 kilos of lean mass, so that's just over 3 pounds, and lose 2.4 kilos of fat in only 6 weeks. So that's gaining just over 3 pounds of muscle and losing about 5.5 pounds of fat in 6 weeks. And a recent study by Kolkohan et al. Found the subjects training 6 times a week in their study were able to gain 2.6 kilos, which is 5.5 pounds of fat-free mass, so lean mass, and they also lost about just under a shade under 1/4 pound of body fat. So there you have it. It is possible to gain muscle and lose fat. Other interesting thing to think about there is that most of those studies are like 6 to 8 weeks, and they were training hard. Like in that final study, it was a 6 times a week training protocol. So, this isn't going to come easy. You're going to have to be dialed in, dedicated, committed, and blast it for the short term to get the results. Now, let's not get carried away. At this point, you might be thinking, this sounds awesome, I am definitely recomping. And while the research on recomposition is undoubtedly exciting, it is also important to remember you are not the standard participant in a research study. You're a fitness enthusiast who's taken time out of your day to listen to fitness podcasts, probably train your ass off frequently, and care about your nutrition. So after hearing all that scientific evidence supporting recomposition, I can understand if you're tempted to go all in on the recomp and think you found the holy grail of physique development. But let me temper that enthusiasm with some research, and some research that might be more applicable to you. Scientists at the University of Texas Southwestern conducted a study with participants who are most likely more similar to you. They studied advanced male and female bodybuilders, and they found that they were only able to squeeze out a small, insignificant and almost immeasurable increase in bicep size after 6 months of training. It was 24 weeks to be exact. And that was while they were bulking in a robust calorie surplus and an intense training protocol. So the more advanced you are, the harder it is to build muscle, and it certainly is very hard to build muscle and lose fat. So if you are an extremely advanced muscular and lean lifter, bear this info in mind. Recomposition might not work for you. After all, even with a hefty calorie surplus and a good training plan, these guys struggled to gain any mass. So the way I think about it is this: if your goal is to gain size, I ditch recomposition as a strategy. I believe it works, but I see it as a way to build a small amount of muscle while getting leaner. In my opinion, recomposition as a bulking strategy is flawed and doomed to failure, especially if you're already muscular lean and experienced and a dedicated lifter. Now, let's get back to more positive and exciting news to fan the flames of recomposition again. Let's get back on that bandwagon and get us all fired up and ready to burn fat and build muscle all at the same time. And this is actually genuinely exciting. When you consider those really good results they got in some of those studies I talked about earlier, that was all without any adjustments to the participants' nutrition. That was just training intervention driven. They were all just told to adhere to their normal eating regime. Now, if those results are possible without a nutrition intervention geared towards optimizing results, imagine what is possible if you get your training and diet to work synergistically. And a little plug for a previous episode here, but I did an episode on diet periodization to help you do exactly that, to marry your diet and training protocols to work together the best possible way. So there's kind of a 1 + 1 = 3 effect. So if you want to know more about that, make sure you give that one a listen after this. So a study by Dr. Bill Campbell, one of the world's leading researchers on physique development, provides an example, and actually an excellent example of what is possible when diet is factored in to good training. In his study, they investigated the difference in protein intake and what that did to body composition in female figure competitors. So these are high-level competitive female athletes who take their training seriously, and they compete in physique and figure competitions. And they had a high protein group, which consumed 1.14 grams of protein per pound of body weight, versus a low protein group, which only consumed 0.41 grams of protein per pound of body weight. The high protein group gained 4.62 pounds of muscle, while simultaneously losing 2.42 pounds of fat. So for those that work in metric, they gained 2.1 kilos and they lost 1.1 kilos. And that's despite eating, on average, of 423 calories more per day than the low protein group. And both groups underwent the exact same training protocol, so it really illustrates the power of nutrition. Like I say, training is the stimulus that creates the potential. Your diet and your nutrition will dictate if you reach that potential. And those women ate more calories but actually lost more fat and gained more muscle. And how is that possible? Well, one of the reasons is that protein is not only the most satiating of food, so it keeps you feeling fuller for longer, but it has the highest thermic effect of feeding when consumed, meaning that when you eat protein, it takes more energy to digest than carbs or fats. So 100 calories of protein tends to take more energy to be broken down than 100 calories of carbs or fats. And that's important because, to my mind, for most lifters, a recomposition is actually just a good dieting phase. Or alternatively, a dieting phase done well will have a small recomposition effect. And that's a key point, so I'm going to repeat it. A dieting phase done well will have a small recomposition effect. So that's the way I frame this for most people that are interested in recomposition. For experienced trainees, a recomposition is an opportunity to lose fat and gain muscle, not a chance to gain muscle and lose fat. And that may seem like semantics, but the emphasis on the priority is the key. You can build a smaller bit of muscle while while being in a deficit if your training and diet are 100% on point. To build a lot of muscle, however, you will need a significant calorie surplus, and to do that, you will not lose fat. Now, most recompositions you'll hear about have individuals who have lost a large amount of body fat and gained a bit of muscle. That's great, but it's not the recomposition that people are all over the internet are imagining, especially when they set their sights out to sort of compete on their road to Mr. Olympia glory. If you think recomping will allow you to end up significantly bigger and leaner than you are, you're setting yourself up to be disappointed. If, however, you are thinking of recomping as an approach to get noticeably leaner while gaining a fraction of muscle mass, you might be pleasantly surprised by the rest of this episode, because I'm going to outline exactly how you can maximise your chances of success. But be warned, you are going to need to be really dialed in on all the variables needed to achieve it. And as we just identified, you're going to have to eat plenty of protein, because it seems that protein can allow you to consume more overall calories and help you to get those recomposition effects. So, what are those variables, you're probably thinking? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here are some of the key elements you need to have in place to have a chance of achieving recomposition. You need to think short term, and thinking short term is sometimes okay. You need to be hyper-focused. You need to assess and reassess and course correct along the way. You need to remove emotion and use outcome-based decision-making. You need a tightly controlled calorie intake. You need a high-protein diet. You need to prioritize peri-workout nutrition. You need to strategically use refeeds. You need to optimize your training volume and find the Goldilocks zone of training volume. And you have to understand that cardio is a useful tool that can help. Now, before I dive into those, here are some important considerations the authors of the Recomposition article identified and in their paper highlighted. So let me quickly go those. It's worth bearing in mind that each individual's experience level and training status will impact their body composition and adaptations. Those with less resistance training experience that are further away from their genetic potential can build muscle at a faster rate compared to well-trained individuals. So we've covered that, but it's worth hearing it from the experts and the authors. The training stimulus needs to be progressive resistance training is going to drive the muscle adaptation response and impact body composition outcomes. So you need to make sure that your training is progressive over time to keep you giving a stimulus to create a recomposition. Your dietary intake and nutritional strategies can significantly impact training performance, recovery, and body composition outcomes. Additional variables such as sleep, metabolic health, and hormonal profiles have been shown to have effect on body composition, but can largely be assessed by training status and body fat percentage. Now, they also identify that more research is needed to grasp a deeper understanding on exactly how body recomposition occurs and the factors that influence it and what can favourably impact your results. Now, sadly, if we wait for that research to happen, your lifting career, and for it to be really clear-cut answers, your lifting career will probably be behind you. It takes time. Like a lot of the research is a bit behind the curve with actual in the gym training experience. So, with that, let me layer on some extra details I think will make the difference in success and failure of recomping for you. So, it's a short-term strategy, a short-term solution. You cannot recomp indefinitely in the hope of eventually ending up 20, 25, 30 pounds heavier and leaner than you are now. It doesn't work that way. To achieve effective recomp, you have to be laser focused on the details, and even for the most dedicated bodybuilders, there is a limit to how long you can maintain the discipline to tick all the boxes required for recomposition. And even if you could go full robot mode and just sort of keep on trucking and keep on track, it wouldn't work because the body adapts. You need a robust signal to get it to keep adapting. As you'll soon discover, an effective recomp relies on you being moderate enough in your calorie consumption and training volumes to allow for a slow-ish rate of fat loss. If you lose too quickly, the chances of gaining muscle evaporate, and because of the approach to a recomp needs to be moderate in terms of calorie restriction, it's not assertive enough or robust enough of a stimulus to push past adaptive resistance. There will come a point where you either have to slash your calories to get leaner or increase them to gain muscle. And that's why I suggest 8 to 16 weeks, but if I'm honest, to absolutely most cases 12 weeks is the absolute top. Something between 6 and 12 weeks for most people is the sweet spot, and actually if I had to narrow that down even further, probably around about the 10-week mark is ideal for a recomposition. Now, adaptive resistance I've talked about before, but if in case it's a new term to you, it's basically that your body is an incredible adaptive mechanism and it will adapt to whatever you throw at it. From training and dieting strategies, those are a good example for what we're talking about here. And that's why over time your training needs to strategically vary, and why just eating the same calories now might help you lose fat, but it won't have you lose fat forever. And likewise, as you gain weight and gain muscle, you'll need more calories to keep gaining muscle and weight. Recomping doesn't really cater to that because, as I just identified, it needs to be a relatively moderate and slow approach, and after a period of time adaptive resistance will kick in and your body won't be able to, or you won't be able to overcome that with the moderate approach, and that's why recomping indefinitely just isn't on the cards. Now, that kind of 10-week period, roughly around that ballpark, is long enough for you to drop a noticeable amount of fat at a slow enough rate that you can also give yourself the chance to gain some muscle mass. And it's also a time frame that most highly motivated people seem to be able to follow the plan perfectly for. To achieve the near impossible, you need a great plan and perfect execution of it. Can some people last longer than the 10, 12 weeks that I said? Yeah, absolutely. But do I think it's wise for you to try? No. Number one, because you might fall off the bandwagon and not be able to do it, or you might fall into gaintaining, or adaptive resistance might just kick in and you actually just get really poor results. So I'd commit to getting the absolute most out of yourself, your training, your diet for 10, maybe up to 12 weeks, and then move on from recomping for a while and pick a dedicated focused goal like training for strength or training to build as much muscle as possible, or taking a diet break where you bring calories up a little bit and then pushing harder on a fat loss phase to get really, really lean, try and get shredded. Now, it's a short-term solution, and it's a short-term solution you need to be hyper-focused on. In that previous point, I highlighted how important it was to be focused and motivated to achieve recomposition as an experienced lifter. In fact, I think you need to be hyper-focused. You need to develop like tunnel-like vision with your eyes on the prize to get what you want. You need to avoid all distractions, and the best way I've found to achieve that with my clients is to tie it to a clearly defined event or outcome. For example, booking a photo shoot or competing in a bodybuilding show or a physique competition, dieting for the holiday of a lifetime, or preparing for a major event like a wedding or a landmark birthday, have all been really powerful motivators for my clients. And the people that I've worked with that have had the best recomposition effects have had something like that as the carrot at the end, the thing that keeps them going, that gives them a really, really good why. And with this goal on the horizon and the added accountability, it provides people often another level of commitment, dedication, and drive. They sort of access that it's their next level, and they take things to a whole new degree. They have their eyes firmly fixed on the prize, and they can do everything to reach it. And that hyper-focused approach is amazing for relatively short-term goals. It can lead to burnout if you try and redline your way through life though. Pick a time when to push, make sure that you have a powerful why to keep you motivated, a strong desire to see things through, because you cannot afford slip-ups if you want to achieve a recomp of noteworthy proportions. Alright guys, I'm just going to pause it there because I'm in the gym and there is a baby absolutely screaming the house down. Let me pause it, I'll be back within a second. Right, we're back. Screaming baby seems to have left the building. Right, next point is to assess, reassess and course correct. Outcome-based decision making should guide the whole process of a recomposition. The outcome is clear, you want to lose fat and gain muscle. How you go about that will change based on your starting position and results. So let's think, if you are a skinny fat guy, then eating at maintenance and training properly is probably a good choice for you because you want to fill out your arms. Getting a little bit leaner would be good, but you don't need to lose a ton of weight because you're not actually that big a human being, but maybe you just want to recomp to bring your waist in a little bit but fill out your shirt sleeves. You don't want to end up skinny. But if you're starting out as someone who is a bit chunkier and you probably have decent muscle mass but underneath a reasonable coating of body fat, you just need essentially to lose enough fat to reveal it. And if you can add a bit of muscle on the way, that's a bonus at the end. So sort of looking at your specific situation will feed into how you go about this. But the authors of the study suggest that keeping a close track of your progress and monitoring your gym performance is essential to effectively recomping. And the fact that when you recomp, your energy level should be high enough that your gym performance improves over time. And gym performance is easy enough to track. You know that if your lifts are going up or you're getting an extra rep. But tracking your body weight on the scales is also a useful and easy thing to do. It's definitely useful data. So depending on your starting point, the change in your weight or actually the lack of, if you're that skinny fat guy, you might not want to see your weight change, but you just gain a little bit of muscle and lose a little bit of fat. But if you're someone who's carrying 10, 15 pounds extra, you may want to lose weight. So how much you should be seeing of a change on the scales will differ from person to person. But there are, in my experience, there are two general types of client who see great composition or recomposition effects. And those are those skinny fat guys that I mentioned earlier. And then the guys who are about 10 to 20 pounds over their ideal weight, but they already carry a bit of muscle mass, but they've just got a bit too much timber on their frame at the moment for how they want to look. Now, so looking at each scenario, for the skinny fat guys, the goal essentially is just to keep the weight the same throughout the process while improving performance in the gym. If they train hard, eat enough to keep their weight static, but bump protein intake up to about 1.2 grams per pound, that's 2.6 grams per kilo of body weight, and manage their lifestyle factors like sleep and stress levels, they have the potential to see excellent results. And the result for that skinny fat guy is that the waist will get smaller, so they'll be less fat, but they should put a little bit of size on their arms and they'll fill out their shirt sleeves that bit better. Now, for those guys who are more in that 10 to 20 pounds overweight region, the lifestyle factors, hard training and high protein are still all vital. However, they should aim to lose weight. And in my experience, the ideal rate of loss in that scenario is between 1/4 and 0.5% of your body weight per week. So that means for a 200-pound guy, that's between half to 1 pound a week. Now, in practice, the leaner you get, the higher your risk of muscle loss. And for that reason, I tend to start these guys out at the higher end of the target rate of loss, so around about 0.5% of their body weight per week. So that would be a pound in that 200-pound guy example, and do that for the first few weeks. And then gradually we throttle back and taper that down and reduce the rate to 0.25% per week towards the end of the recomposition phase. And taking that approach has been extremely effective. And over kind of like a 10 to 12 week phase, if you kind of break that into 3 little mini blocks, you start off at about 0.5% rate loss a week as your target, and then make adjustments based on hitting that. And then about a third of the way through, so 3 to 4 weeks in, you transition and maybe lose about 1/3% per week. And then as you get leaner, again, towards that final third, the last 3-4 weeks, you drop back and hit that 0.25% of body weight per week. And that usually works as a really foolproof rate of loss to give you the best chance to lose a good chunk of fat, but build some muscle along the way. Next key point is to make sure you base decisions on outcomes and not emotions. And it kind of builds on that last thing, but outcome-based decision making really must guide the whole process. Don't let your emotions take over. It can be tempting to want to make adjustments based on emotion. Changing your physique is an emotional endeavor, and it is tempting to want to train more and eat less and think that more training and eating less will fast track your results, but that is a mistake. It's a false economy. Instead, all that will happen then is that you will probably lose fat quicker, but your chances of gaining muscle mass disappear, and actually the risk of muscle loss, not even maintaining muscle, increases. So overtraining and undereating is not the recipe to follow. Instead of that, you actually want to pump up your protein intake. The age-old recommendation of eating 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight is a reasonable guideline in many sort of bodybuilding type endeavors, but for recomposition, you need to do better than what's a reasonable guideline. We want optimal. And the research on recomposition indicates that when you do that properly, you eat a bit higher than that normal gram of protein per pound. And the research actually indicates when cutting and that you have to bring calories down and calories are lower, protein intake is effective at helping you to retain muscle mass. And the recomposition effect sort of echoes that. So the fat loss evidence shows you want higher protein, and recomposition goes along the same lines. And they recommend in this paper with the top recomp researchers in the world, 1.2 to 1.6 grams per pound of body weight of fat-free mass. Now, fat-free mass isn't total body weight; it's the amount of lean tissue on your frame that is not body fat. Now, most people don't know exactly what their fat-free mass is. So when I'm coaching people, I'd like to make things simpler and stuff that they can action straight away. So I suggest you just go with 1.2 grams of protein per pound of body weight per day as your protein goal. That's quite a lot, but it will really pay off and help you to maximize results. Now, once we've got protein taken care of, the next sort of a nutritional thing is to prioritize the powers of peri-workout nutrition. Effective recomposition is all about attention to detail, the aggregation of marginal gains. All these little small gains can add up over time to have a profound effect across the course of your composition. And one such example is taking care of your peri-workout nutrition. So something like a liquid pre-workout meal and a post-workout shake, or maybe even intra-workout if that is your preference, can help. And liquid calories around the workout are often my preference because they can aid digestion and make absorption easier, so they don't interfere with quality of training. There's nothing worse than trying to train and feeling nauseous because you've got a heavy meal there. So liquid calories per workout nutrition can help you make sure you've got the nutrients you need in your system when you need them, but in an easy to digest and assimilate fashion. Now, the recomp research indicates that having a carbohydrate and protein shake post-workout can enhance your results, and it's one of those little marginal gains things that stacks up, and if you want to get a really good recomposition effect, I suggest you pursue. Now, as a rule of thumb, between 25 and 40 grams of whey protein mixed in with 30 to 50 grams of a fast-digesting carbohydrate, so for example something like maltodextrin, straight after your workout can be effective, and I know that's something that Chris uses with a lot of his clients. Right, next nutrition tip is that strategic refeeds can help. So as we've identified, unless you're skinny fat, you're going to be essentially using a recomp as a dieting phase done properly where you will gain a bit of muscle. Now, being in a deficit is a requirement of that, so your weight's going to come down, but periodically a refeed can help to minimize that risk of muscle loss. If you're in a chronic calorie deficit, the increased or the chances of muscle loss do increase. So what I like to do is use 2 non-consecutive days per week where calories are ever so slightly above maintenance. So this means across the course of the week you're in a deficit, but you're not in a deficit every day. And I found that to be really powerful, both physiologically in terms of helping any negative metabolic adaptations, but also psychologically. Knowing that you get to eat a little bit more a couple of days a week means that people are more likely to adhere to that deficit today because they know they get more food tomorrow. And twice a week seems to work well in terms of it's enough per week that they can still maintain a good enough deficit to lose at an appropriate rate, but they don't feel they're being deprived too much, and tend to do them Wednesday and Sunday with a lot of my clients. That natural rhythm seems to work, and if you do that, it can reduce the chances of negative metabolic adaptations, and I think it increases your chance of being able to build a bit of muscle within a recomp more easily. And then on those days, another tip is to do your hardest and biggest workouts on those days. So quite often we'll do a leg session or on one of those days, or if they have a particularly challenging upper body workout where they're doing back, chest and back, on one of those days there's a bit more food in there. It helps training quality. You get a bit of a pump because there's some more food in there, which is always nice when post-workout, and that keeps you motivated and adhering to the plan and pushing through for the duration of the recomposition phase. Now, if you need to reduce calories because you didn't lose the sort of rate that I outlined as a target, you can decrease the calorie intake on the lower days while staying on course in the surplus days. If that makes sense, you can keep those small surplus days just the same and just shave a little bit off those 5 days a week you're in a deficit, and that will add up to a slightly bigger deficit and should get you back on track losing. Again, whilst that's the way that's practically worked really well for some of my clients, the key is finding out what works for you. So you take the principles of I'm going to lose weight at this rate and I'm going to give myself some refeed days, and then exactly how you piece that together to fit around your training and your working week that's the magic. That's where like a good coach can help out and making sure you're making the right decisions. Now, just one word of warning on the refeed days. Remember though, they're like sort of they're a refeed. We're looking for getting quality nutrients and additional calories in on those days, but they're not cheat days. Eat the same kind of sort of, bro physique supporting foods you normally do, just have a bit more. Increase portion size, but eat the same sorts of food as opposed to having big food variety. Because when you're dieting and you sort of been on relatively bland foods that make dieting easier and keep you full, suddenly having really hyper palatable cheap foods can make it hard to get back on track, and it derails people. Once you've had a taste of that good stuff, it's really hard to get back to eating the chicken, broccoli, turkey, tuna, brown rice, white rice, sweet potatoes, oats type things that have been the staple and the cornerstone of your diet. If you've had a cookie or a pizza, it's hard to get back on track. So I would caution against having sort of those hyperpalatable foods during the recomposition phase. Rest of the year, absolutely have that balance, but usually the rest of the year you're not in a deficit, you're not craving food, and you haven't got this hyper-focused and really important goal. If you find you struggle with trigger foods and you have that trigger food and the next 3-4 days are kind of ruined because you can't stop eating it, then essentially you can undo almost your entire recomposition results just in that short time frame. Okay, so moving on from nutrition stuff, let's look into training a little bit. And one of the key things I think for an effective recomposition is to find the Goldilocks zone of training volume. And that is also known as your maximum adaptive volume, or MAV. And this is the quantity of work that allows you to progress optimally without eating into your recovery threshold and tipping over into the risk of kind of overreaching or overtraining. And then the temptation, as I've outlined, when chasing a hyper-focused goal, is to do too much. And I understand that temptation. It's one I've fallen victim of in the past. And as I said, transforming your body is highly emotional. We want results, we want them yesterday. But when emotion takes over, logic tends to disappear. And when logic disappears, you can convince yourself that more training means a greater muscle building stimulus and more calories are burned. And this seems like a great idea. It even seems logical. However, it doesn't take into account the big picture view. It's critical to remember that for most people on a recomp, the calories are going to be relatively low, and they're going to be in a slight deficit. And when lower calories comes lower energy and a lower tolerance for overall training volume. And if you do too much, you will suffer negative consequences. And those include the risk of muscle loss increasing, you overtraining, you getting injured, and you driving stress hormones like cortisol so high that muscle gain and fat loss are both blunted, which when you're recomping is exactly what we want to avoid. There's no recomping happening if we blunt the potential for muscle gain and fat loss. And I have seen the best recomp results with clients lifting 4 days a week and strategically adding in some cardio, which I'll cover in a second. But that 4 days a week, it almost naturally acts as a faucet for the appropriate amount of volume to be done across the course of the week. Now, we don't let those 4 sessions turn into marathon sessions. They're efficient and focused sessions. My preferred split for these 4 sessions a week is an upper-lower split that allows for each muscle group to be trained twice per week, which is a great frequency for promoting muscle gain. A lot of research to support it as being a positive approach for muscle building. And it allows, in my opinion, for a really nice balance between training enough but not too much. Generally, I recommend to do 6 exercises per workout for roughly about 3 sets per exercise. And if you're doing 6 exercises in a workout, I usually go with making it 4 compound ones and a couple of isolation ones. And then another thing to think about with the recomp is when given the choice of increasing training volume, so doing more total sets or adding in exercises, or focusing on relative intensity, effort and intensiveness, so basically how hard you push each set, how close to failure you go, I prefer to focus on the latter. Recomposition is about doing enough work but enough quality work, so really make sure every rep of every set counts. Treat every rep as a growth opportunity and also as a moment of personal accountability. Make each rep as challenging as possible. Focus on the target muscle, make that work. Don't cheat your reps, don't cut your range short. Good quality reps stacked on top of each other, and do just enough of that to get the results you want. Now, with all that said, you should tailor these guidelines to be specific to you and try and establish your own MAV. To ballpark your MAV, I suggest you take the amount of sets you do for a body part at the peak of your bulk and reduce it by 10%. I like to say that because it's relative to you then. If you're someone who's used to doing tons and tons of volume, you might tolerate volume a little bit better than someone who's on a lower volume approach. So if you just take about 10% off what you're normally doing, it's a relative change to you and will probably deliver really good results. Now, if you're not sure what your peak bulking training volume is for each muscle group, don't worry. In that case, I suggest it's just a smart move to use the established published data and what good experienced coaches are finding with their clients as a starting point. And on that basis, doing between 8 and 12 hard sets per muscle group per week is a good rule of thumb. Now, I've suggested doing an upper-lower split where you hit each muscle group twice a week for optimal results. So that means that in each session, each muscle group will do 4 to 6 sets per session. So, for example, on your upper, you might do 2 back exercises for 3 sets each. Right, so that means, like an upper workout might have you doing 2 pressing exercises, 2 exercises for back, 2 pulling exercises, and 1 each for biceps and triceps. That gives you 6 total exercises for the session. It's a decent volume. It's enough to stimulate gains, but not so much that you're going to overtrain. Right, to supplement your 4 days of lifting, I like some cardio. Now, my favourite type of cardio to include in a recomposition is low intensity steady state, or LISS. I don't mean endurance training. This is not the time to run a marathon. What I mean is very low level activity that helps you burn some additional calories, but while it's also relaxing and restorative. Done properly, this will actually improve your recovery and burn calories, which is a nice combo. It means you will be better recovered for your next training session and give a good effort in that, but you have also burnt through some calories to help you lose fat. Now, simply getting outside for a 30 to 40 minute walk each day is my favourite prescription to achieve this. I really encourage all my clients to do this when we're pursuing recomposition. And doing it first thing in the morning is my preferred choice. It allows you to start the day doing something positive. You almost get a win under your belt, get your head in the game and in a good place. And it gives you a sense of achievement. And I found that if you do something really positive like that, it means you make better choices the rest of the day. So you're setting yourself up for success. And another thing to think of is at that time of day, cortisol should naturally be that bit higher. Now, cortisol, you may not know, actually helps to mobilize fats for fuel. We think of it really negatively. Lots of people tell the dangers of cortisol and being a stress hormone, but actually we need it and it serves some really important purposes within the body. Otherwise, frankly, we wouldn't have it. But we want to take advantage of that. And naturally, to help keep you alert and focused and wake up in the morning, cortisol is that bit higher, but also it plays a role in mobilizing fat, so allowing you to break down fats and then oxidize them to burn for energy. So doing that walk first thing in the morning when cortisol is naturally a little bit higher can make the early morning walk just that little bit more effective for fat loss. Again, it's one of those marginal gains. It's not a dramatic game changer, but we do enough of these little things right, it'll help you get there. Right. At this point, it's time for me to wrap things up. Here, let's give you a bit of a summary and conclude things. So body recomposition is definitely possible, but it is difficult. To determine if it is a good choice for you, you need to firstly assess where you fall in the training age, status and body fat spectrum. If you're already very lean and an advanced lifter, it probably isn't the right choice for you. But if you analyse those three things and think that recomposition is on the cards for you, remember to take it slow. Remove emotion from your decision making, use logic and outcome-based decisions about how to guide you, and strive to optimise every detail you can. Lose at the rate I described above of between 1/4 and 0.5% of your body weight per week. Get your training volume on point and find a way to fight your urges and insecurities to do too much. Like almost every mistake people make while recomping has to do with having unrealistic expectations, where they think they're going to get jacked and shredded overnight, or being excessive with their training and dieting, or from just being impatient. And you need to curb all of those kind of emotions, those inclinations. Recomping is a slower process. Fat loss, it will be slower than compared to, say, if you were committing to an all-out cut, and muscle growth is going to be slower than if you were doing like a muscle growth or bulking phase. Because of this, it's suited to some people better than others. Some people, certain personality characteristics slow and steady can win the race, and also they're in a better physical position where going at that rate will benefit them. Now, many people do fall into what I would call as like sub-optimized trainees. There is scope for improvement in all the little details. If that's you, then recomposition could be a possibility. And it's important to consider, even if you have been training for years, you probably have some room for improvement to your training program, intensity, the effort, nutrition, or your supplement protocols. If you can dial all those in for a short period of time, recomposition is probably on the cards for most of you, but it is only a short-term solution. So don't expect to be able to get the holy grail of gains of muscle gain and fat loss indefinitely. That is something that I cannot emphasize enough. Much like your approach to the cardio in this, where I suggest slow and steady pace, that's how your approach has to be to recomposition. Slow and steady will win this race. Trying to rush the process will cause you to fail. So instead of looking for a quick fix, give yourself 10 to 12 weeks of relentless consistency and you can build muscle and lose fat. But your rate of gain on muscle mass and your rate of loss on the scales should be a sort of steady, moderate pace to get the most. So it's a short-term solution, but you need to still treat it as almost like a marathon, not a sprint. After you've done those 10 to 12 weeks, even if you're someone who was relatively new to training, your chances of further recomposition begin to get smaller and smaller. And if you're an advanced lifter, after 10 weeks of a recomp plan, I think they're tiny. So once you've pushed through that hyper-focused recomposition phase, I suggest you transition to either a dedicated muscle gain, strength phase, or fat loss phase. Remember, you cannot recomp forever. So trying to do that is definitely a false economy. I think if there was one key message I wanted to get across today, it's that. So recomp is possible, but it's not the forever solution. Once you've got a recomp out of the way, you'll be better off pivoting, focusing on just one goal, so not two sort of kind of competing goals of fat loss and muscle gain. Pick a goal. Is it muscle gain? Is it strength gain? Is it fat loss? Focus on that, make progress, consolidate those gains, and then transition again. That's the way to make really, really dramatic long-term progress. But if you want dramatic short-term progress, body recomposition could be for you. All right, guys, I hope that has given you a really good comprehensive overview of the benefits, the possibilities, if it's for you. If you do have any questions, as always, you can contact me at tom@breakingmuscle.com on email, or DM me on Instagram. It's just at Tom McCormick. I would be happy to answer any questions you have. If you're interested in getting coaching from me, then likewise you can check out my website, tommccormick.com. And if you have any sort of feedback, questions, I'd love to hear them. And likewise, if you want to rate and review the show, that always goes a long way to helping spread the word and get this information out there. So please rate and review. It'd be much appreciated. All right. Until next time, enjoy your training. Let me know if you get some recomposition effects. I'll speak to you soon.